Hello, everyone. Once again, we're live with the topic of towards the experiential enterprise, and we have a very, very special guest today. My name is Jason Grant, as usual, CEO of Integral, Redesigning Humanity, and we'll go straight into the question rather than me trying to introduce the guest. Please tell us, who are you?
So I'm Katz Kiely, and I'm the CEO of a software startup called BEEP, which stands for the Behavioral Empowerment Enterprise Platform. And our mission is to change the way the world works.
So, as designers and design thinkers and change agents or upgraders of humanity, effectively, tell me, Katz, how are you taking the approach to make things better? Well, like maybe what's the core thing that's broken to start off with, and how are you making that better?
Yeah. Okay. So let me tell my story so that I can kind of explain to you why I've got to where I've got to.
Absolutely.
So started in 2001. No, let me start a little bit further on. 2003, set up a business. And the business was all about, I could see that this thing was happening where large enterprise, the kind of BBCs and the Oranges and all these big corporations weren't keeping up with the times at all. And at the same time, I had this big ecosystem of startups who could make stuff happen like this. They were little digital geniuses, and they had this way of working, which was, I'll dream it and I'll make it. And so you could see that these big companies were going to really start struggling. So big companies needed innovation, small companies need money, and they don't speak each other's languages at all. So I guess now we'd be called a digital innovation or a digital transformation company. I don't know. But at the time, we were just making stuff up. The first thing that we made up was, and as far as I know, it was the first ever open innovation competition. And when I talk at keynote, I say, this is the point where I have to ask. I'm going to ask you, if there's anybody out there watching, this is the time. If you did an open innovation competition before 2003, then now's the time to stand up and tell me. But until somebody does that, and they haven't yet, I'm going to say we made the very first open innovation competition. And that was, so the idea was that we'd help the client really figure out what the problem was to solve. Then we'd advertise that to our ecosystem of startups and digital agencies and geeks. They would then respond to that. This is how we think we could fix this. We built a platform so that then each of the people who posted would tell all their network, and their network would vote for the ones they liked best. So they did our marketing for us, essentially, and grew our ecosystem. So we'd use then that crowdsourcing to make sure that we were taking the very, very best startups. But that wasn't all of it. So once we'd found the 10 people who had the most interesting solutions for the client problem, we'd then bring them into workshops to make sure that the languages they were speaking were going to hit home with the client. And they were always very open. And at the time, it was quite revolutionary, because people would say, well, why would people go into a workshop and share their ideas? But the problem is that too many innovators have ideas that they never get made. So the opportunity to be able to use feedback as a development process, and to learn from the way that other people pitch their ideas is incredibly valuable. Anyway, so then we get them back to the client, and we get these 10 startups that come in with these great pitches that were completely lined against the business KPIs. The boss would normally go, oh my God, is this happening now? Because clearly, still, I would say, most people aren't really aware of what's possible, what technology makes possible. And then they'd say, we're going to commission you and you, and they'd take them into their organization. And then we found that kind of a year later, 18 months later, or somewhere between then always, this poor startup would get chewed up and spat out, which was neither good for the startup, and clearly they'd kind of invested quite heavily in the relationship, or for the company. So then we started looking at the fact that actually the reason they were being spat out, kind of pushed out by the corporate antibodies, is because the operating system within the organization was so broken And people are incentivized not to innovate. They're incentivized not to talk to each other. So we started doing similar things on the inside of large organizations. And then before that, we'd done this event called Between, which again, as far as I know, is the first kind of cross-platform, cross-sector innovation event. And it was very playful. Somebody once talked about it as being a digital ashram. You come along and meet those revolutionaries. We call them between people, the kind of people who might not have creative in the job title, but they are creative and they can't help themselves. It's a better way of doing things. And so one of the things we did as a company to drive sales, to drive marketing, to make a market, I suppose, was to do this big event once a year called Between, which would have very senior people from big companies, senior people from small companies, and thought leaders, artists, just people who are inspirational. And my idea was, let's have a cross-platform, cross-sector community where people can start to share and collaborate and try and figure out what the future might look like. It's really hard to get people who are from different worlds to talk to each other because they've got different drivers and different languages, and we're tribal. And so you stick with your own kind, right? So then we were like, okay, so to make this work, to make people really get value out of it, we need to start experimenting with formats. So we started doing these, I guess we could call them design thinking workshops now, where we give them a creative problem. And we say to all the delegates, there's going to be 2 workshops. We're going to put you into groups of people you would never normally meet. Today, you're going to brainstorm. By the end of tomorrow, one of your team is going to stand up on the stage and one of the teams is going to win a competition. And suddenly, what happens then when you've got people around a table with a really clearly identified problem, all of the differences in those people just melt away. And you come in, and also they come up with the most incredible ideas because, one sector will always look at something one way and another sector will look at it. And so when we bring people together into one space, and I'm talking to a design thinker, but it was like, oh my God, this is amazing, because they kind of form their own little mini tribes. And what we also realized was it didn't matter what the problem was, so long as they were all focusing on one thing. And it was the element of competition as well, the fact that one of them was going to go through. So then like I say, we started using digital for internal communications, digital sort of open innovation within the confines of large organizations. So just got very good at experimenting and learning from what helps corporations be more resilient, more connected, all of those things but it was all experimentation. So we didn't know what we were doing. And often I'd say to the client, look, if we knew how to make this work, how to take you through change, we'd be extraordinarily rich, but we have to keep trying and testing and learning from what we find out. So enter it with that mindset. And so I just think that's something I always say, it's really important when you're talking to clients to just make really clear there are no easy answers. Some things go wrong, but there is nothing like making a mistake. It's always a learning, so long as you approach it in that way. And then I got headhunted by the UN. And it was the worst and the best year of my life. In that it was a big digital transformation piece. And I had this idea that going and joining the UN as a change agent, I was going to change the world, and it wasn't corporate, so the people were going to be lovely and everybody's going to be heart-driven and want to change the world. Not so much. It's a very, very disjointed, fragmented, hierarchical, bureaucratic organization. And so trying to take them through change was just like nothing I'd ever done before. And all I could think of doing was kind of looking through the experiments I'd done over the years and then tacking them together and see what happens, because what else are you going to do? I've got 14 months. We've got this massive program to try and deliver. And so I took 3 things away from that. One of them was any organization can be taken through change, even the most change-resistant ones. If you do change with people and not to them, if they feel excited by the change, it isn't a problem, but you've got to create desire. Otherwise, forget it. You've got to get people thinking about the big picture. You've got to have a really clear North Star, so you're traveling together. Second one was the world is in a right old mess, and I just had no idea. I'd kind of come from this happy land where I hadn't seen the data, I hadn't seen what was happening environmentally, I hadn't seen what was happening politically, really, or socially. And obviously, we did a lot of work. This was 2010, 2011, so it was just before the Millennium Development Goals, the predecessors to the SDGs. And so I thought that was a really important thing. Is it was like, well, okay, we have some really exciting data here. Let's get people to start getting the people inside the organization and our stakeholders to start focusing just on those things. And then you realize that actually they haven't got any data, and actually they're not really heading towards them. They're not really goals. They're more like aspirations. So it was a mess, and the UN and governments are never going to do anything about it because they just don't care. And that's not saying they're bad people, they're not. But the operating model within these organizations, the frameworks that they're operating in, are so broken. So they were the things I left with. And it was very successful. It was a very successful program. It nearly killed me. And then I left, and that's when I got into behavioral psychology. Reason being, I thought, well, I've figured out a bunch of things that work, that allow people to go through transformation, that engage people to get them collaborating. Why do they work? And if I understand the psychology of what's going on there, and if I can start understanding why people are so resistant to change, then I can figure out why these approaches work and make them better. And so that's when I met Dan Ariely, and read his book and then met him. I'm guessing you've read Dan Ariely's books?
I don't actually, personally, I don't read books. What I do is I watch the presentations from the authors and kind of soak in everything they have to say. So that's the way I read books, yeah.
But you've seen Dan's TED Talks and...
Absolutely, and I actually have a Chrome extension installed on my machine that every time I open a new tab, it brings in another different bias.
Oh my God, what is that?
I can't. I find out in a sec. Keep talking, and I'll tell you.
Find out. That sounds amazing. Because that's the thing. Once you actually understand the way that we're wired, you start to understand how everything that we've done, our economic frameworks, our political frameworks, our organizational frameworks, are diametrically opposed to the way that humans, to the conditions in which humans thrive. And I had one particular big realization, which was around change, which was basically humans have got two key states of mind. We've got the reward state, which we develop so we can keep social tribes together. And in the reward state, we're kind of innovative and communicative and all of those things that you want people to be. We're the best we can be, creative. And there's a set of conditions that get people into that reward state, and they're like empathy and connectedness and progression and all those kind of conditions. And then we've got the threat state. And the threat state, obviously, we evolved, whether you call it fight or flight. We evolved so that we could run away from predators. So when you're in the threat state, the last thing you need to be able to do is innovate or collaborate or communicate or be creative. You just need to get away. And because survival is more important than being creative, we've got 6 times more neural pathways which are constantly looking for threat. So then if you look at what we're... every time then that change is done to people, i.e. change comes out of the blue at people, their physiological reaction to that is the fight or flight. It makes you stressed. I mean, you think about it. When was the last time that somebody launched change at you that you weren't expecting? It's fine if you want it to happen, because that's cool, because that's something you decide. But if people come at you out of the blue and launch change at you, it makes you stressed, and you're not going to be innovative. You're not going to be creative. None of those things.
So yeah, there is this website called mycognitivebias.com. And because today someone looks like someone's broken the internet, the website's not opening for me, but I'll put a link in the YouTube. description. There is another one called Pocket Biases, which is a Glide app. I'll do just a quick share screen here, because I think this is worth seeing for those who are interested in this kind of stuff. There is this cognitive bias codex, which looks like this, and it maps out every single cognitive bias. So if I zoom into this, there is this whole thing around, what's this, what should we remember? And then there's like less is better effect, Occam's razor, conjunction fallacy. And so if I open a new tab here, it brings in cognitive biases randomly. So here you go, cross-race effect, whatever that is. I open a new tab, it'll go sub-additivity effect. So my personal goal here is to master all these biases by something like 2021, and be able to self-detect if I'm having this, for example, overconfidence effect, that I'm suffering from. And there is mycognitivebias.com. So yeah, that's kind of, I think that's all inspired by Dan Ariely's books.
And I mean, and so then very, very briefly, so then I got given a fantastic brief by the GLA, which is like the Council of London, which was basically, all of that data, channel, comms, behavior change stuff that you do. Is there some way that you can build a prototype which is looking at cities, but rather than using technology in infrastructure way, big top-down infrastructure builds, that we can start using the technology we've already got to start bringing communities together so that they can start operating together and nudging each other towards more sustainable behaviors, which was then, it's like a year and a half of being paid to read so many documents, so many books, playing with stuff, talking to people, really thinking through what the academy is saying about behavior change and how you drive it, but also prototyping. So we made a couple of things. So that then leaves me in a position. Oh yeah, and then there's the Burning Man story. So it's somewhere in the midst of this, I get invited to Burning Man by the founders. Have you been?
I've only been in astral projections way, not in a physical way yet. So
it's incredible. And yeah, so I got invited by the founders, ended up in Burning Man, didn't really know what it was, didn't really know what to expect. In fact, it was Dan Ariely who said, of all the people I know, if you've been invited, just go, because it's the biggest social experiment ever anywhere in the world. And you see firsthand what happens when you change the rules of engagement. When people are, when they're motivated and given permission to be 100% themselves and to feel safe and warm and to be able to give and to share, and people are unbelievably creative. I mean, there's all the things you would imagine, but people come up with an idea and suddenly it's happening, and you're just like, what just happened there? So there's all this potential in humans that we're not allowing to release, because actually people are living and working within frameworks which are diametrically opposed to the conditions that help people be the best they can be. So anyway, that's a very long story about why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So then I'm in this situation where I'm like, okay, I've probably been but the only person in the world that's tried all these different experiments. I know the approach for helping large organizations through transformation. And I don't mean just technical transformation, which is where everybody's obsessed with, but cultural transformation. How do you give people the conditions in which they can thrive and be innovative? And the world needs fixing. So what can I do to solve that? So my challenge to me was, how do I put all of these experiments that I've done over the years and the bits of technology I've built and put them into one platform that I can sell to corporates to help them unleash the potential of their people, and also do something that's going to help the world progress. So that's quite a challenge. And I remember phoning up Matt, who's my tech guy, and saying, I think I'm going to build this platform. It's going to do this and this and this. And he was like, oh my God, you are insane. And I was like, yeah, but I've said these things before and you've said I was insane and we've managed to make them happen, right? So we're going to do this. And here we are. So what it does is it invites people across the organization to talk about the things that aren't working for them. Those little irritating niggles that people have to put up with on a daily basis in every corporation in the world. And they report these things, and it's very much more a sort of B2C thing than a B2B. So it's pretty and usable and gamified and social and all those good things. And if enough people across the organization are talking about a similar problem, and actually because of the way it's built, those problems become more and more refined as they go through a conversation, the people who are most engaged with that problem are then invited to a design thinking workshop. And again, I mean, the IDEOs, etc., would love us to believe that becoming a design thinking facilitator has some magical pixie dust attached to it. It does not. It really doesn't. So long as you know what the problem is, and so long as the people in the room are coming from different worlds, and you take them through a really clearly defined and fun process, you're going to get something great at the end of it, which is going to be an improvement from where you were at the beginning, if not the total solution. But then again, there are no total solutions. There are only tests, right? Tests and learns. And then you might have to do another workshop about it. So basically what it does is set up an operating system within which people can be rewarded and recognized for constructive complaining and learn to be design thinkers.
Fantastic. I'm just breathing into that one. And one thing that we said we're going to have this as a conversation that just emerges. So there's nothing prepared here in terms of questions. But one question, so just a backdrop story in terms of we came across each other across two events that were completely random, but I met you at the first event and then I bumped into you at another event and I was like, who's stalking who here? And now we're chatting publicly on YouTube because I noticed that we were talking about such important stuff that I didn't really want to speak to you anymore privately. I wanted to put it in public. So we put it in public. And I knew I was going to have lots of questions for you. So one question that came to me as you were talking, especially when you spoke about Burning Man, is that so far I've spoken to you twice and now I'm speaking to you for the third time. And even through this Google Hangouts conversation, I'm getting this inevitable feeling of comfort, trust, wholeness, balance, groundedness. Okay. And so my question to you is really, how are you able to make me feel comfortable, and how do you achieve this? Is this something that you think you were gifted with, or is it something that you've consciously developed as a capability?
That's a really interesting question. And people have said this to me before. So where does that come from? I think I could tell you very personal stories about where I've come from, but I'm not going to speak about those publicly. But I got something quite tragic happened to me when I was younger. And I felt very let down by those nearest and dearest to me over that time. And I think I learned a kind of acceptance. I learned to kind of get over that by being in love with the world and I learned to be very, very positive and so I wonder whether it's something to do with that. But it's certainly something that over the years, and I think because of what happened when I felt very disconnected with people, everything that I've done in my career has been about how do we make people feel more connected with each other? How do we make them feel able to love each other more and to be more collaborative and safe? So I suppose because I've experimented so much with creating environments online and offline, which are about helping people to be the best they can be, I suppose you pick things up on the way through. it almost feels like it's my reason to be in the world, to develop ways or to support ways of helping people collaborate through tools. And I guess watching all the time, watching how people interact with each other and having to learn from that, because then I'm wanting to build it back into systems, I guess then it just becomes normal. And it happens with even like the most senior leader. I find out, I'll sit down with people and they'll be telling me they're really inner problems and political, and then they'll kind of go, I don't know why I'm telling you this. But I guess it's because they feel safe.
Yeah, so in my experience, creating that safe environment in which people feel free to discuss things that otherwise they would consider to be the sort of blasphemous within the context of the corporation, or just inappropriate, even inappropriate. Because, for example, inappropriate thing seems to be discussing things like feelings. So I've spent 4 months working with British Telecom just recently on a major transformation program, and I introduced this simple question in conversations with BT staff and at random times, which was when they would start, saying, expressing sort of frustration, which I could sense as frustration. I would ask them, how did that make you feel? And they would just kind of jolt back because they've never been asked that. And some people have literally worked there for 30 years. They've never really been asked how something made them feel. And then they can sit back and go, first of all, they look at me like really weirdly, and then go like, no one's ever asked me that question.
Yeah.
And I'd say, great, so tell me. And then go like, well, it made me feel like this, made me feel like this. But then again, why did I feel like that? Why did, so they start actually contemplating about empathy and emotion and experience, which is actually our topic here, experiential enterprise.
Yes.
So perhaps that's then the natural next question. How do we move towards the experiential enterprise?
By understanding, everyone's talking about CX and EX and I'm getting customer experience and employee experience. But all it is ensuring that absolutely everything you do within an organization is based around the reality of how users are going to use that service or be helped by that tool or be supported by that way of working. It's as simple as saying experiential organizations are those that have got design at the heart of absolutely everything they do. It's like Bracken Darrell, who's the CEO of Logitech, has this thing where he says that everything can always be better, always. Because, at the end of the day, if you're starting with a person as the end user of a product, then everything you deliver across all touch points is going to be seamless and comfortable, whether that be internally between different departments or whether it be between the people who are on the front line and the people who are buying your service. Experiential organizations are those ones that have got design, like I say, absolutely buried at the heart in their DNA. So every time they know that everything can always be better, and we have to start at the end. Who's going to be using this? Why do they want to use it? Where are they coming from? What is their context? What's the experience they're going to have from working in this way or from using this product? And I think it's also funny that actually people get blocked at the idea that UX just sits within tech. It's how people use websites. It's like, no, it's not. User experience is the experience of the user. And if that's good, they will use it. If it's not, they won't. And there's an interesting stat, actually. The statistic I was reading for a piece of work I'm doing at the moment. Experiential organizations, the kind of Amazons and Apples, etc., who aren't, they're by no means perfect, but they're thinking in this design first way. Over 10 years, they're 210% more profitable than people in the lower quartile. And it's obvious because if people don't want to do something, they're not going to do it. And if they do it, they're going to be miserable. And if they're miserable, they're not going to be productive. It's like, whoa, how do we lose? It's like common sense. Common sense is not very common, is it, in enterprise?
Yeah, there's a whole TED talk around how there's no such thing as common sense, and we're like I personally have been contemplating deeply about this idea of realm dynamics, the idea that certain people are literally living in another realm of thinking, that maybe, in English language. My background is that I came to UK as a refugee from Bosnia after spending 3 years of war. So that like UN experience that I've had from the ground level in Bosnia. So we've kind of like observed UN from many different perspectives. But the idea of realm dynamics being that some people are already above other people's heads, which what they would say in English language. So that gets ignored. However good that thinking, that innovation is, if it's not pitched back down to the understandable language of the regular folk in the organization, it will be seen as weird, too wacky, too hippie, too doesn't make sense, above the head, all that kind of stuff. We don't know how to use that. We don't want to use that, all that kind of stuff. And so there's been a question from Robert Green beforehand. We managed to gather some questions, which I think leads on nicely here. Is how do innovation teams in large organizations work best with strategy and insights team? Because we touched a little bit on that, insights and sort of data or lack of data.
Well, again, I don't know why it still surprises me, but it seems to me that in many organizations, people don't really understand the why. Like, to me, the strategy has to be the thing that has to come first. And everybody needs to not just know that there's a strategist that's creating a strategy, but they need to understand, where is it we're getting to? What does success look like? How are we going to get to there? If you don't understand the North Star, do you use that expression?
I personally use it quite rarely. I talk about in design, sort of, there's the idea of current state and future state. Like, where do we want, what does like future look like? For me, I was like, I've taught myself, because I'm coming from an engineering background, and for me it was a lot about spoken word and written word. And I really like taught myself out of just speaking and writing, but drawing and imagineering. That for me has been like a 10-year-long process. So nowadays I like to draw things out as much as possible, because that pictures is 1,000 words, literally.
Yes, I can't draw, but I can scribbling and get other people to do that. But yeah, and I find myself, I don't know whether you do as well, when I'm working with pretty well most of the clients I've ever worked on, you're working on a project looking at a piece of the organization, and you say, so why are we doing this? Yada yada yada. No, that's what you're doing, but why are you doing this? Da da da. No, that's how you're going to do the thing that you said you're going to do. But what is it, as you say, what does good look like? What is that future state? Because if we can't all have a shared vision, if we're not all heading towards what good looks like, we're never going to get anywhere. What we're going to do is there's a book called Bullshit Jobs, which is really worth a look, which is all about that. I can't remember the stats, but I think it was 40% of people who work in large organizations genuinely think that their job could be done better than by a machine.
Yeah.
So they're generally running around like headless chickens, doing, with no real idea of how it all fits together. So I think without a really clear vision and a really clear strategy, all of this kind of all these programs, all these disconnected programs of people doing clever things on their own across the organization, they're completely pointless. And they make people feel even more disempowered, because, when you worked on a project and you love the project and you feel like you're getting somewhere, and then nothing happens again, it's worse than doing nothing in the first place. Did I answer your question?
You touched on a lot of relevant subjects around it. The question was around how do innovation teams in large organizations work best with strategy and insight teams, but that question is already assuming that there is a strategy and there is an insight team, and that's actually even a recognized thing within the organization.
Yeah, but I
There
think
might be,
I think both of those things tend to sit in ivory towers. By which I mean,
at best,
if they're there and if they actually know what it is they're supposed to be, and if they're empowered. But I think I did a bit of research on the way that people set up innovation labs, because we all know innovation labs, and I've set up a few, find it really difficult to really drive change, and they're not really, because they're not really clear about what they're there for. So they're somewhere between pragmatic, helping people. They're not embedded in a clear way throughout the organization. And quite often they're set up with different rules of engagement. And because we're tribal, and because we literally release neurochemicals and make us behave in defensively aggressive ways towards people who look different and behave different and speak differently. It's normal, this the tribal thing. Setting up an innovation lab which is extra and different to the organization is immediately setting up for failure. So for me, what an innovation lab should be, and this is within the realms of the beep of what we're doing. If you can figure out across your organization what people really care about, and then bring them together to learn how to be designers, to come up with at least the top level of what they think should be done, and then the innovation unit then that becomes the engine of the organization, because then their job is to listen to what the organization's saying, taking the best of their ideas, making those happen, feeding them back into the organization. So it's not about be innovators. It's about how can you drive continuous improvement across our organization? How can you make, a myriad small innovations, which then obviously, if you've got 1,000 small innovations going on and each of them is having impact, then you've got a massive impact across the organization. And because it's coming from people, they'll accept it because they feel like they've had a part. And as we all know, the IKEA effect, if you've been involved in making something, you will absolutely make sure that that thing happens. You feel more love towards it. And in a way, if you are involved with making a thing, you feel very attached to that thing. Same thing goes for strategies. If you feel like you've been part of something and you've been part of the design process and not had something done to you, it's your baby. You want to see it happen. So I think that's a very long answer to say the way that innovation labs are built are just broken fundamentally and never going to work, in my humble opinion. And they're not set up to work, and they're not empowered to be able to do their best work.
Yeah, so guiding a bunch of clients through this program that we have called Fresh Mind, which takes a lot of cognitive architecture into account. We utilize this thing called gene keys, which is quite sort of esoteric in nature. But interestingly, whenever I do gene keys profile for someone, which is available free on the website, it brings back like the CD or the gift words. Okay, and to me, this has become a big contemplation in terms of what are the gifts of each people that are innately baked into them. Because I asked you earlier on the question of whether you had this, making people feel comfortable innately in you, or is it something that you've cultivated over time? So looking at one of the clients' gene key CD gift words, what came up was the word synarchy, which I wasn't familiar with before that, and then I looked it up, and it's like a synergistic anarchy or something like that. Have you come across that, and how does that correlate to what you're doing?
That sounds, I've never come across it. I love it. I'm going to steal it. Synarchy. But it's exactly, that's exactly what you need to, for me, success comes from giving people the opportunity and the frame, the safety to be able to play in a constructive way. So is it anarchy? Yes, because each individual is doing their best within the realms of who they are, I guess.
The definition of synarchy is joint rule or government by two or more individuals or parties. I think the definition is perhaps a little bit weak, but the way I receive that word or symbol is that, like, really it's like synergy across the whole organization continuously, and you sort of never really know when it's going to happen. It just happens, like it happened when you and I met, and I just sensed and felt like we should be having this conversation, and we're now having this conversation. And whoever listens to this conversation, and I invite everyone who's listening to this, reach out to myself, reach out to Katz, look up all these things, educate yourself, come and let's continue the conversation in different channels, whether it's on WhatsApp and Facebook, YouTube and so on. And maybe we can do part 2 of this with a more distilled variant of both these questions and comments and answers to that. So, like, in terms of one of the questions from James Lethem was, are you asking Katz how she developed her empathy? That wasn't my question. My question was around how you are able to make people comfortable, but it's relevant in terms of design thinking. Do you think that empathy is something that you've developed and cultivated as well, or is it something that you just have? Or do you even consider yourself to be an empathic person? And what's the role of that really in all of this process?
So it's pivotal. The idea, user experience is, if it sits within quantitative data, it's broken. If you don't understand people and work with them and really kind of get a feel for who they are, you can't make things work. So empathy, to me, empathy is integral to good user-centric design. You can't have a user-centric design process that isn't actually based upon empathy, because empathy is understanding a person, right?
Okay, so I'll throw a little curveball at you now, which is, I was working on a program for Ministry of Justice here in UK, who are going through a huge transformation process, which is planned over 10 years period. Okay, and it's literally a redesign of the entire judicial system. And I was brought in as an expert to advise on experience design across all the services. And within 1 week of scoping around, seeing what's happening and the breadth and scope of this thing, I'd realized that on a 10-year program, we actually have to empathize with the future human that's going to be living in, let's say, 2029. That's who we are designing for. So my question to you, and this is really from my soul, how do you empathize with the human from 2029?
I would say that humans in 2019 are pretty well exactly the same inside as humans in 1 AD. And will we have changed? No. Will we have changed in a very superficial way? Yes. Will the generation, but what makes us tick as humans, it's cross-boundary, it's cross-age, it's, we have a universal mind. I mean, obviously there are differences, but at the core, humans are human, and empathy and connectedness and autonomy and all of those conditions will still work for people or not. And what I would also say is that I don't know, do you think people in 1900 would still have woken up and felt excited and engaged if they were put into a really good design thinking workshop? Of course they would. It's like we haven't changed. And this is the massive problem, isn't it? That we make the assumption, because the world is changing so quickly, the technology is changing so quickly. But the truth is, our brain is almost exactly the same as when we first or start looking into such things anyway, we haven't changed. And we are universal, and we do have those universal biases. And so I don't think it's going to be very different. I also struggle with this idea of millennials and the X gen. It's like, oh, for goodness sakes. Yeah, of course there are differences, because a certain generation has used digital more. They used to reward and recognition faster. So there are some kind of crucial differences. But something that people say to me is, oh, millennials are more mission driven. They care more about the world. And I was like, well, what were you like when you were their age? It's like at a certain age, before you have kids and get a mortgage, of course you care more about the world and you can be more mission driven. So I think there's a load of tosh talk about.
So I have to warn you here, because I just about scrape into the millennial cohort, right? So
How do you feel? Do you feel that you're more mission driven than me, as an example? Because I'm
well,
not a millennial.
I do feel, actually, it's weird because I do feel a lot more mission driven than perhaps if I look at my parents. Yes, I do feel a lot more mission driven. But then again, if I look at all those cognitive biases, often the time I'm kind of sitting in the corner and sense checking myself to go, is this even normal? Right? Am I potentially suffering from some sort of profit complex? Right? Or am I so far up my own ass that I can't see the sun shining outside, right? And am I spoiled? Am I a broken person, right? I contemplate on those things a lot, and but I always conclude with no, I'm not. And actually, we all ought to have some sort of mission and a purpose, just like companies ought to, because otherwise, what the fuck are they existing for,
Yes,
right? But this isn't necessarily perhaps the intuition of everyone. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that purpose is the. I mean, all of Dan's. Have you seen the talk that Dan does about purpose at work and how
Hmm.
important it
Hmm.
is to have a sense of
Yeah,
purpose?
yeah, yeah.
Purpose is the most important things to human beings everywhere. I think what has happened is that the older generation, um, sort of my parents' generation, grew up in a world whereby they really thought that they would have a job for life, and they had a community, and they could relax within that. And therefore, I think
Mm.
people probably weren't. We weren't thinking in a global way so much. They weren't, because they weren't living global lives. Um, do I think that older people now, if you talk to them about um, the fact that 8 million tons of plastic is being pumped into our oceans, there's a rising awareness of the fact that capitalism, as it was invented in 1980 or whatever, this incredibly short-sighted, profit at all costs economic system that we've got now, it's broken. But how did we know? It's like suddenly you're swept up in this tide, and then suddenly everybody's operating the same way. But it's very, very. So I think that there's a rising awareness and a dissatisfaction about the way that we've been treating the world and each other, and the way that we've been treated at work. And I think the fact that it's become so much more obvious that the media is uh, I don't like to use the term, but there's lots of fakery. There's always been fakery. Like, the media is there to drive opinion, marketing is there to drive opinion. But I think the fact that digital has made that more obvious, again, I think it makes people really deeply dissatisfied, and that's coming. Then that's kind of coming to a head in two ways. There's this move towards the right wing, because people just desperately want things to be the way they were, and there's too much change. And then I think that there's this growing body of people who can just see that the way we've been doing things is fundamentally broken and it needs fixing. And I think there's people of all ages who They're just thinking we need to do something. I mean, for me, I've got a daughter. And so while I'm at the UN looking at the data and listening to these stories about how terrible things are and how fast it's progressing, I'm thinking, I've got a daughter. I cannot leave this world a worse place than it was when I got here. I need to make sure that my daughter feels okay to have a child. So I've become certainly much more mission driven. I think people are, is what I'm saying. And also, I think all of the statistics that you're reading, you know, the fact that we have up to 12 years to fix things before it's too late, that kind of gives you a bit of a kick up the arse, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I've also been contemplating quite a lot about this idea of pre-frame, right? That like we are pre-framed by our surrounding to do things that we feel like it's our thinking, but actually we've been induced these subliminal messages really to then go like you. So you see a lot of these, whatever the letter is, Gen Z, Gen X, post-millennial generation, they all want to be different.
Yeah.
And in their difference, they end up doing lots of traveling around the world, staying in hotels, renting instead of owning. They're going out. They're not getting married because marriage is not a cool thing. You know, but all it's like basically you can just like notch up a whole bunch of like commonalities across all of them, and it's like none of you are doing anything different. Like doing something different would be to say, I'm not traveling to just go and have latte Costa coffee latte in Greece instead of in London.
Yeah.
I'm not traveling because it's exactly the same experience there. You're just geographically at a different place.
Exactly.
You're not interacting with the locals. You're not caring about anything that you see there and so on. And like within all this kind of like mind altering space, there's like people queuing up now in Peru to do the ayahuasca ceremony, thinking that that's like the solution to themselves. And they're like, Peru has become like a place of like this tourist overwhelm, similar with like trips to Nepal and so on. So there's nothing unique about that whatsoever, and they've just been pre-framed by this travel industry to do more traveling.
And I think, you know, that's not new either, is it? You know, it's been going on for very many years, hasn't it? That people have been traveling to. I'm just moving my. People have been traveling to find themselves. It's like somehow if I travel to India, I'm going to be able to find myself more easily. It's like, well, possibly not. I talked on a panel which was about modern day spirituality last year, and I said to him at the time, "Why are you asking me? I don't know anything about modern day spirituality, really. I mean, I kind of have my own theories, but." And he said, "Oh, you're into all that Burning Man stuff. It'll be fine. Just get up there and talk from your heart." And this guy who set the scene for it said, you know, to become truly aware, there are two ways. One of them is you can go and sit on a mountain and meditate every day of your life, and you may achieve enlightenment. Or you can take acid. And I would seriously recommend that you all take acid. And I was sat there on the stage looking at him, looking at everyone in the audience thinking, wow, this is a really interesting conversation we're about to have. I don't agree. I mean, I think that lots of people need different things to be able to get to different places, but
so we're now
fast, isn't it? I'm going to go and take ayahuasca and find myself.
Yeah. So we're now in a slightly potentially weird realm, even for the innovators watching this program. But I'm going to take it slightly to the edge there, and again give an example from a fresh mind client conversation, where a lot of like really capable people that we are coaching through Fresh Mind, who are actually have hit a sort of, let's call it, innovation wall. Okay, because a lot of us have been around and we've seen all sorts of innovations that are basically just a remix of another thing that we've seen elsewhere, because designers have been begging, borrowing, and stealing from elsewhere, remixing, changing colors, changing a little bit of the shape, but it's actually the same thing for perhaps a different industry and so on. And so that's been going on for a while now, and it's reaching some sort of saturation point. I'm going to use the lines behind me to say, so innovators seemingly are hitting this wall, not knowing how to transcend and include what they've done so far. And so when I'm coaching people through Fresh Mind, people say to me, "Oh, I've got so stuck. I want to take ayahuasca." So this is an actual, example from a client conversation. She said, "I've been contemplating about taking ayahuasca, but then I spoke to my dad. This man is, let's say, 70 years old, and he said, don't take ayahuasca because it's not from your region, right? So it's not going to work well with your body.
Wow.
Instead, take mushrooms."
Oh my goodness.
And I went, hold on a second, like you don't need to take any basically pills and drugs effectively.
Yeah.
Like Fresh Mind process will clear up your psychosocial baggage. So as you drop the weight that you're holding on to, the actual heavy duty stuff that you've picked up, you become enlightened because now you're lighter. You can fly up into the air and sky, and you realize as you're flying as a bird, metaphysically speaking, you don't need to be carrying so many things. You can visit spaces and places without having to actually even sort of be physically there or land down. You can just observe it from a higher perspective. And people find this quite unbelievable, literally. But as they go through the process and they transcend and include this imaginary wall that they put onto themselves, which is a whole load of limiting beliefs and just self limitation, they transcend that and they break into this space, which is often a whole load of nothingness, but it's like a blank canvas from which to innovate with freedom. Then they're like, wow, I can't believe that I'm here now. It's like, well, that's good, because now you're in a different realm of thinking, and that's the sort of realm dynamics that we're talking about. So there was a question around how do you then achieve that in like en masse in organizations where effectively a lot of people are not willing to do that kind of mind altering process.
Well, I would say, so here's a stat, which you may or may not have heard. 87% of people who work in large organizations are disengaged. It's like,
totally.
and when you think that those people are spending 9-10 hours a day of their life doing something they genuinely don't care about. So they're spending more time doing this thing that they're not even quite sure what they're doing or why they're doing it, than they are with their loved ones. They are switched off. And like in a zombie state, I genuinely think that most people now are in a zombie state. So whether they'll ever get to a point of wanting to think about spirituality, or whether it's just about changing the environment in which they're working so that they have more autonomy, that they are rewarded and recognized for the things that they're doing, that they feel they've got a sense of purpose, that raises, I mean, I've seen this happening, and you must see it happen all the time. Just giving people the space in which they can prove that they're a designer. Like, we're all designers, I believe. I believe that we're all creative in the right environment, because actually we're problem solvers. We like to see things and improve them. That's just what humans do. So do I think everybody will shift up to that space of enlightenment? Well, probably not, no. But we could start turning the dial so that people could at least start to think again and start to feel that pleasure of being a problem solver, and feel the pleasure of collaborating with people, and remembering how good that feels, rather than keeping the head down and waiting till the end of the day. I've had 2 panels recently where I've been talking about the future of work is the work where people are awake and they're empowered and given permission to be problem solvers at all levels, across all jobs, because that's the way humans are, and that's where we should all be. And I've had twice on panels people saying, yeah, but that's utopia. Some people just want to get up in the morning, do their work, come home, get it over with. And I'm like, so if you had the choice of having a job where you had to get up in the morning, just go in, get it over with, and go home, or the same job where you actually enjoyed it and feel that you were, like I say, rewarded and recognized and all of those things that make humans thrive. Which one would you take? It's like what's happened is we've assumed that this is normal. And
Yes.
it is normal, but it makes no sense. It makes no sense for people, for business, for the planet. You know, what does make sense is giving people the conditions in which they can thrive.
So there was a couple more. Let's take a couple more questions, and everything else we'll park for part two, perhaps, of this conversation. If
Oh my God, it's been an hour. When is
it's
that
been an
going?
hour. Yes, yes. Time flies when you're talking about all this kind of realm dynamics and bring in a bit of spirituality and mind changing stuff. And so one of the questions from Lucy Wills was, how can we make sure that we are using new tools and processes to fix problems rather than to hide them?
Well, that's exactly why we built Beep. It's, as I say, for me, and so when I'm pitching to clients, I always have quotes from Glassdoor at the bottom of every slide, and they're usually pretty awful.
Mm.
And you can see them kind of going, where are those quotes from? They're from Glassdoor. It took me 5 minutes to find them.
And they're from people who worked at your organization.
Exactly that. It's like, actually, if you don't listen to what people are saying inside your organization, they will tell everybody anyway. They might do it anonymously, and that means every prospective employee, every prospective customer, and investors, they're all seeing that stuff. They're checking out this stuff. We can all see it. So I think there has previously been a fear of listening, because it's like, let's just pretend it'll go away. If we don't listen, maybe it's not happening. But you can't do that anymore. If you can't hear where the problems are across your organization, and you can't, and so then we've come through another stage where people do surveys, and that's their way of listening. And some of them are so forward thinking, they'll do 4 surveys a year so they can hear what people are saying across the organization. Well, do you know what? It's ridiculous. You're getting data. By the time you've analyzed the data and figured out what you're going to do about it, everybody's forgotten and moved on. Everything moves so quickly. So Beep is about having a real-time sentiment tracker. How are people feeling en masse? So you can actually see how the organization pulse is. But also, like I say, rewarding and recognizing them for saying, this is not working. This is slowing me down. And in the same way, and again, you'll know all about the Toyo's way, but if it's slowing them down, and there are 10 other people who are having the same problem, it's slowing the organization down. And if somebody's hearing the same complaint from a customer and nothing's being done about it, and so that's why we built Beep. And also when you're listening to people, so as an example, WeWork have a little thing which is called Ask Adam Anything, whereby you can literally email the founder and say, oh, this is broken, tell me anything, tell Adam anything. Fine. But then if you're going to listen, you need to be able to respond. And unless you're going to grow and grow and grow your kind of improvement team, the most sensible thing to do is to ask them what's going wrong, make sure they really understand what that problem is, and then get them in a room to fix it. Because then it's real-time listening and action, and all the business data and insights that brings. So my answer is, we've been going through an evolution for the last 10 years, but we've got to the point now where it completely makes sense that we need to be empowering people to be able to fix their own problems.
All right. So perhaps on a slightly kind of more specific question, but it's a comparative one, and I want to pick up as many real world questions from YouTube comments. And Jenny Tilgren asks, in my experience, innovation can be delivered by using tools like Slack to connect people in subgroups very easy. What's your view on that? Personally, I've never seen this happen before. My take on Slack, I just actually from this morning breakfast, I had a breakfast this morning with head of comms from Facebook Workplace, and we were talking about how Slack is just, you sort of just capitulate on the messages there. So I'd love to actually know answer to this. How, for example, how Beep is different to sort of the Slack type subgroups and conversations.
I mean, I don't mind Slack, and I've used it, and I was an advocate for Slack, and I've been the advocate who's brought it into projects and companies, and I've become seriously disenchanted by it.
Yeah.
Because geeks love it. If you're working on a particular project, there's a certain sort of people who love it, and it causes, you know, it's better because people are collaborating. So the idea was that it would cut down email. Challenges. Not everybody uses Slack, and it's completely unsearchable. And so I find, and so you get a gang of people from the company that are using Slack, some of whom are not necessarily using it particularly well. It's a stream of noise, and you've got email because you have to keep everybody else involved anyway. So you just end up with more noise, and still it's not helping you get to where you need to get to. And why is Slack an innovation tool? It's a project tool. Is it a collaboration tool? I guess it's a collaboration tool because at least you're all in one space if you can get the whole team in there. But it isn't a solution. And what's different about Beep is it's not about people talking to each other online and having this kind of constant that we have on Slack. It's specifically about getting to a point, and that point is getting people into a design thinking workshop to do something about it. And fixing problems is what makes people happy. And more importantly than that, being in a multidisciplinary workshop, you meet people in the best possible way. You actually get to know people. I don't know how many times I've been in corporations where even in the same building, I'll talk to people on two different levels and they're doing exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. And I'll talk to the second one and go, are you aware of the fact that there's somebody downstairs that's been doing exactly the same thing? And they'll go, no, really? So it's a broader problem. And the other thing that I didn't talk about Beep is it can't just be about person to machine, machine to person, because people get lost then. It's you and the screen. And so with Beep, we've developed a big screen data visualization, which it means that in the same way that PwC, etc., use post-it notes when they're doing a project, so everything's out and you can see what's going on and where progress is. It does that. So it's not just you talking privately with a bunch of people. It's a big public, shared, trust, transparent system, which is specifically about how do we get the right people in the room to actually get them to engage and fix stuff. So it's that relationship between virtual and physical, and how those two things can work together to create an environment for continuous innovation.
Yeah, and that seems to be like a massive trend at the moment, and it should have been a trend or like a thing that we've been thinking about for a long time, but it seems to be only kind of now properly picking up pace, perhaps with some of the service design aspects, but even service design is not really doing that properly in my view. The merger and intertwining of the physical and virtual need to be a lot closer and lot better mapped based on some sort of proper mental models, as opposed to taking, as we said, geeks. And I've been one of those geeks where it's like, oh, it's just like I'm on the chat all day long. And then I realized like I haven't actually done anything other than chatted to a bunch of other engineers. And it's been fun, but that's not work. That's not progress. That's not creation. That's just brain farts. And noise. There's so many more of these points to touch on. I'd love to do part 2 of this conversation in time to come. At this point, I'm just going to ask you, you shared with me something that you nobody knows about you, and I'm just going to say in public that you're a jazz singer. What would be a scope of you just singing 1 or 2 lines of some jazz song as an outro for this video, so that we can
There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy. They said he'd wandered very far over land and sea. There you go.
Wonderful. That's, I think, the best way to take it out. And thank you so much. And thanks for everyone who watched this. Please subscribe and comment further, and I'll pick up all your questions and integrate them into part 2 when we do them. And thank you so much, Katz, once again. All the links to Beep and other things that like Katz has done in the descriptions. Thank you so much, and wholeness.
Bye.
Bye.